Welcome to Explorations. Today we're talking with Arvind Singhal, who is the Samuel Shirley and Edna Holt Marston Professor and Director of the Social Justice Initiative at the University of Texas at El Paso. Over the past years, he has published and researched widely on the positive deviance approach to change, transformation, and innovation. In this last of a four-part interview, Arvind discusses how changing narrative frames can take us to places to see possibilities that we would never have seen on our own. So let's get to it. Talked a little when we were just getting ready to get going about narrative frames and some of your work that you're doing in India. You want to talk a little bit about that? It's fascinating to me, and I love the way you are. I mean, essentially, you've already established this notion of changing the story or looking at where the story is already evolved into a new story, and that story can then become the dominant story instead of a minority story. Would you like to tell us a little more about that?
Right. Certainly. So, Rick, as you know, our combined work and our love for stories, we fundamentally believe, in the simplest of way, that stories can take you to places where you've not been. And they can create the conditions for you to see possibilities and realities which you may not have experienced on your own. And, so I love quoting Mr. G.K. Chesterton, who, of course, said many interesting things. But one of the things that he says about stories, and especially about fairy tales, and the importance of fairy tales in our lives, whether it's an ugly duckling or, Cinderella or whatever, he says that fairy tales are more than true. Not just because they tell us that monsters exist, but because they tell us that monsters can be vanquished. And so, that to me is the power of stories, the power of a fictional story, right? Positive deviance to me, in some ways, has the characteristics of a fictional story. Why? Because it's non-normative. What? This mother is adding the greens of sweet potato plants? That's sort of fictional to most people. It's not a story that they live and breathe. Or what? Is this nurse, using her knuckles to type? And, you try to type with your knuckles. It's not that difficult because many of us do a lot of finger pecking anyway, no? And so the beauty of the positive deviance approach, in my opinion, and I say this is like turbocharging the positive deviance approach, is figure out these unusual stories, which are real, but also fictional in the sense that they are non-normative. Figure out the small little ways in which people have solved the problem in very difficult circumstances. And then I always suggest now use this for formative research. Forget about doing, gap analysis and needs analysis and what they don't know and, what attitudes you need. You can do that. If you have tons of money and you, really like to play in that field, you should certainly do that. But if I had to do research now, I would do a very small but guided positive deviance inquiry where I would try to unearth these stories where life thrives amidst adversity, no matter what issue you're tackling. If you are interested in the status of women, look for women who are, thriving amidst adverse circumstances. And if they are doing it, then, the lessons are there. So you referenced my India project. So there's a project that I've been working on for the last 8 years. We've had 3 seasons it's a transmedia initiative, a television melodramatic serial, plus, there's radio, there's a radio series that goes with it. We have a good deal of social media presence for a certain kind of audience. We also introduced integrated voice response system, Rick, because Too often, the story is told in one way, especially if it's on broadcast media, but we created this feedback loop whereby an audience member could call a certain number. And in rural India, now there's deep mobile penetration. So, they listen to the story, there's a telephone number, or they hear a story, watch a story that they can call. It costs them nothing because it's a computer system. And, as they dial in a beautiful voice, maybe the main character of the soap opera says, welcome. And, press 1 if you want to provide an opinion, press 2. So you can track in real time, people's stories about what they are experiencing. How does it resonate? And so the interesting thing was that in season 3 of this series, the formative research, and I was quite heavily involved in this, was completely positive deviance. And we figured out 18 or 19 little behavioral nuggets. And those were then given a new, you would enjoy this. We created a new vocabulary. So, for instance, one of the insights that we gleaned from our formative research was about this young woman who could always negotiate sex with her husband in rural India. Can you imagine? This is clearly, so it's like, well, how do you, do it? And she began to talk about how the frame she used was a frame of, she used the word must, M-A-S-T, which is a Hindi word, which literally translates as being fun. And she had created in her head and in conversations with her husband, the notion of a must pitara, which basically means a box of fun things. And this box of fun things is nothing but a box of fun contraceptives, or a basket of contraceptives. And so we took that idea, so she didn't talk to her husband in terms of time out, I don't want sex. She basically had developed this very playful way of negotiating with her husband, when to have sex and when not to have sex. So if she didn't want to have sex, she would say, I took a vow today, with the goddess, in which I said, for my husband's health, I'm going to forego any bodily pleasures for the next week. And, the husband is not ever going to tell her, that you break your vow just because I want to have sex. But, she'd say, but, you can have fun with me, with my body. But you're not to violate it by impregnating me. Do you get the idea?
Mm.
So
Wow.
She kept the adventurous frame around. Sex is adventure, sex is pleasure. It's the notion of a healthy passion. And that was part of her basket of tricks, you can say, and many other things, right? So for instance, one of the other women talked about the notion of delaying their marriage. So for instance, young women, as we know, get married very early. You get married early, then you have a child, and, then it's this whole cycle. But we found a young couple who gave this new language, and they called it a long engagement. So the idea being, you delay your marriage, but the notion of the long engagement didn't exist in the Indian mindset. But based on these field experiences, we were able to create a dozen little behavioral practices which speak to a basket of contraceptive choices. Like delaying marriage is a new term called lambi sagai, delay or engage, have a long engagement. Delay the first child, we created this term called lamba honeymoon, which means have a long honeymoon. Yeah, you get the idea?
Sure.
And then then the notion of a must hat, which is like a fun hat. You can imagine what that means. The fun pill, the fun candy that you can have, which is the notion of an oral contraceptive pill, the fun needle, which is the notion of injectable. And so what happened, and you would appreciate this, Rick, because we are also interested in research. What impact does this make? When you model a positively deviant behavior with a new language, and of course it's a new non-normative action, if you are tracking this, you track for the uptake of the new language and the uptake of the new behaviors. So if your audience members know what a long engagement is, or what a long honeymoon is, or what has, they got this from this particular media initiative. So it's so from a storytelling perspective, you identify a story that is not common, you give it a new brand which doesn't exist, and the brand is such, we call it a marker. You mark that behavior with a new language, with a new action, so that you can measure the uptake, in the direction of the way you wish for the needle to move. And that's how the programming happens. Of course, each of these ideas is repeated multiple times through different characters. So you don't hear about Lambi Sagai from one person, right? You hear it from, and then you show as the story goes on that it becomes somewhat more normative for people to say, oh yeah, she's having a long engagement. And then you can track its uptake. So this is how we sort of, and you asked me, you began by saying, how has this, sort of, how have you adapted it in your career? But it's my interest in diffusion of innovations, narratives. You bring in positive deviant sensibilities. You begin to focus on these nuggets, the little things that make the big difference. You actually identify them in the field for the problems you're trying to solve. You find a way to, comprehensively, creatively, now create a new vocabulary, which includes actions, and then you find a way to track it. So it's a full circle in terms of being an academic and also being a practitioner. You go from message production to message tracking to message reception, and the feed forward and feedback loop. But you remove the guesswork. That's the beauty. You remove the expert. You remove me saying, oh, this is a good idea, because the good ideas are already there. You just pull out those stories. And of course, you can, creatively embellish them, which we should.
And what I love about this is that the stories are deeply already embedded in the cultural fabric. They don't, you as an outside expert, you don't have a sense of the nuance of the culture. So the fact that they can even show up in a positive deviant way says that they have potential to show up in a bigger way.
Absolutely. That's the premise, that if somebody has made it work, and if somebody has made that story work in a real context against all odds with no extra resources, then the elegance and the simplicity of what they are doing that is different is potentially accessible to all. And that is no small thing, I think.
No, I think
and that's the best kind of innovation, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't come with too much baggage. It doesn't come with too much resistance, right? It's already there. It exists. It's just that it's not a garden or a field. It is just a little pilot plot, which was hidden. You didn't see it. Now you can see it.
Yeah, and it just
and it does have those viral elements. It does have those viral elements because, yeah, it needs to be exactly first identified and then nurtured, watered, remove the weeds, make it attractive. So this discovery, so think about it, this notion of healthy passions as a frame, Rick, is phenomenal, because most often the narrative when it comes to, you and I both served on, the board of PCI Media Impact, we're interested in population control and family size issues. But most of the narrative is stop, time out, condoms, or you're trying to push these things. And so this is like the notion of safe sex. And safe sex is not the same as healthy passions. It's a very different story, right? So this woman who, says that, enjoy me, but I have taken a vow that for your health, right? For your health, that, I'm going to preserve my purity. And then she says, when, we even found some women who tracked their menstrual cycle. They were very good at it. And they had the yes days and the no days. The yes days being the days when they could have sex. The no days being when they, this is like my most fertile period. And how in the yes days, they would go out all the way to please their husbands. Like take a bath, a little flower on, in the hair, a little perfume, so this notion of healthy passions, when it came up in our formative research, and because positive deviance is also searching for those positive elements, right? You're asking what's working, and you realize, oh my God, this is working. And then you say, oh, it's not very different. When we talk to our children about, if you want to play the game of having sex, you take a baseball analogy, right? And then you say, you don't have to hit a home run, right? You can, if you decide to play, you can wear your helmet and your, shin guards and enter the field. Make sure you're wearing your socks and shoes, right? So it opens up all those possibilities of using analogies. And we know the power of analogies, right? I mean, that's how we make sense of the world. You've written about it extensively in terms of, intelligence and so on and so forth. So yeah, I'm very excited about this, as you can tell. And, it gives me hope that we can work with stories that already exist, but which are hidden. And if we can create the conditions for us to see the world in ways that these stories can be identified and amplified, then the weight is off my shoulder as an expert. Oh my God, it's such a liberation.
It also, it also, for me, as I hear this, I'm beginning to think about all the breadth of problems we face as a society and as a world right now. And if we start asking this question, where is it already being solved? Who has already innovated this solution? And how have they done that? We don't have to be waiting for some magic bullet or for academia or for government to fix it, for example, is that we have the power right in our own communities to address the problems that are right there in front of us. So it's
true.
Yeah. So I think this is a good ending point. I'm aware of your time, and I want to thank you so much, Arvind. This has been a terrific conversation, and I can't wait to have your thinking shared with a bigger audience, because I think it's really important.
Thank you, Rick. I always believe that we grow in the direction of the questions we ask. And positive deviance allows us to ask different questions. And different questions can only come from a different narrative that guides, your way of thinking. And so, there's a lot of good work that you do with, your thinking and your writing. And I do see, that synergy of the power of the mind, the power of the heart, the power of the story that brings it together.
That's a great ending. Thanks so much, Arvind.